how's it going out there, sub fans? So today in this video we're going to show you how to reassemble, do a full reassembly of the Sub2000 Gen 2. First video, if you saw, I took it apart more or less as a common gun owner would probably take their Sub2000 apart. People that are going to work on their sub, there's not really going to be a method to what they're going to do. They're going to try to pop it open, pull it apart, and everything's going to fly out of it. So now you have this disaster on your hands. What do? Where do the parts go back together? You know, we didn't get a chance, if you saw from the first video of the sub disassembly, you didn't get a chance to see what part was oriented where. All we had was this pile of parts that ended up on our workspace. So today what we're going to do is we're actually going to narrow this down and look at the parts orientation, what parts go where, narrow down the hammer, trigger, sear cross pins, because all of them are all different sizes. Show you the orientation of the springs and everything else that makes this gun what it is. So give it a watch. I'm pretty excited about this, and let's learn. Start by doing is we need to reinstall the upper and lower feed ramps, and of course this is the lower feed ramp. This is the receiver tube. This is the upper feed ramp, and it's really simple how these go. So you have your ejection port right here, you have your alignment holes, and you have your ejector slot right down there. That is going to insert into this slot exactly like that. And that forward position is just where it leans in there. So there you have that. Then this piece, of course, your lower feed ramp is going to sit on the base. And you gotta kind of press it over that tube, so I would recommend maybe putting that in last. You just want to get it centered on here. There you are. Go ahead and slap that in place. And we need to put our ejector in as well. And the flat portion of the ejector, you can see that. It's going to sit just like that. So plop that in there, make sure it's seated properly. And go ahead and pop your sub tube into position. And you want to make sure there's a rib material right here. You want to make sure those ribs just sit into that sub tube, because it's going to help it orient itself properly. So if you own a Sub2000 and you got this thing and you start looking at some of the internal pieces, you're going to see a beautifully finished hammer on one side, and then on the other side you're going to see a bunch of blemishes. And what this is from is, so when these hammers are go through a black oxide process, there's literally probably 20,000 of them that are processed at a time in the black oxide tank. And as much as you try to shake that tank, as much as you try to aggregate the parts while they're being blued, sometimes it's just not enough, because there's a surprisingly amount of weight to about 15,000 of these that you can't lift with your hands, so it's suspended from a crane usually. And what you end up with is these blemishes that get on there. Not that it's going to cause any issues, but it is a defective surface that does slip through QA. So what I would recommend you do is just keep that well oiled. You shouldn't have any problems with it. It's just a partially start of the black oxide process, but it hasn't been all the way finished. And so just run a bead of oil on that, and that'll be fine. Okay, so with the hammer, what we want to do, this is your hammer axis pin, the pin that the hammer will rotate from. And then this is your hammer spring. So right here is your strike face of the hammer. This is the indentation that the back of this will sit into. So what you'll want to do is just lightly throw this just like that, and then take your hammer axis pin or cross pin and slowly push it into there till it seats. Now you'll notice this is almost like a split spring. It's not solid all the way. So this leg right here, this dog leg, you want to have that facing to the left side of the gun, whereas this single piece will be on the left side of the gun. And that is a properly oriented hammer. Some folks like to just oil this surface in here. You can grease it, oil it, whatever you wanted to do. I just recommend Lab. I know this is in a Montana Extreme grease tube, but I just use this thing as an applicator. I've had this for years, but I use this grease called Lab. I mean, the stuff's amazing. I've seen all the testing on it, and the stuff's really great. So, get a little squirt on the inside, because I ain't going to have this thing apart for a while. There we go. Now we're going to go ahead and insert this hammer into here. And as you see, if you try to push it in, oh my gosh, it's just not going. So the easiest thing to do would be to just raise this up slightly and just sneak it in there. Just like that. How you doing? Alright, and as you see, if we put compression on the hammer itself, we're starting to get that compression. That's what we want to see. That's good stuff. Alright, and since we're over here at this point in the game, we can actually take these small insert bushings or screw bushings that are going to sit in between the two frames and insert them into this one and into this one. And same thing right there. I'm going to get that going. Alright, you see, it's starting to look better every second now. Then, of course, at this point, I wanted to show you one thing in the owner's manual about the various pins that are staged through. Now, the hammer pin is unique because it has that rubber bushing on it. And the sear pin is also unique because it is black oxided or blued. Then, of course, your trigger pin is unique because, well, it's just a regular steel dowel pin that is not colored. One of the bigger issues has been in the past of mixing these up. So we're going to go ahead and set this trigger access pin inside the trigger pin, the large one, and we're going to actually insert it into this hole right here. It's going to be a real tight fit. And again, we want to make sure that our indicator mark is facing down. Now we're going to be ready for the installation of the sear. So grab our sear pin. And this is there's two sides to this. So this is the flat side that will go down. And it's going to sit in the channel just like this because this piece is going to be used to reset and all that fun stuff. So let's take a look here. Run our pin in. And again, if you would like, I'd recommend this is going to be your sear surface. So I would recommend possibly putting some grease on that or something to help with lubricity and help ease the about a 10-pound trigger pull with this stuff. The pins are fully seated, everything's good to go, and I'll try to turn the angle of this so you can see what's going on here. So we want to make sure that this stays retained behind that pin. It's a little finicky getting it back in, but I'm sure we'll come up with something. Be careful not to do what I just did and pop your receiver out. Okay, from the front, that's what you're looking like. Make sure that everything's good to go, you're aligned and all that fun stuff, because after this point is we need to install the sear spring. This is going to be a little fun. So the way it orients in here is just like this. The way it slips, so the small leg of that sear spring needs to sit under here. The long leg will sit on this side of this grip pin. And best way to do it is just kind of use a little bit of pressure from the retention area of this sear surface for the spring. Slip it over that and down. There you are. That's how that should look. And of course, that's going to give it its spring tension. It's good. Here's this little thing to your advantage on this case right here. So instead of putting that down in there, put it up. Because it's going to help the spring surfaces retain their proper shape and position off of that and not keep flopping up on you. So that's just something to keep in mind. The rest of them you can put down, but that just helps to go right there. You need to make sure everything is fully seated in here once you're at this point. So just a little tap with your peen hammer should be fine. Make sure you're all lined up, everything's good to go. All right, I like what I'm seeing. Trigger. And this lower portion will sit in here like this. There is a trigger spring cross pin that has a flat head on the top of it that will sit in here like so. See that? That way it prevents it from coming out. This piece will sit up like this. So there's a long portion of this dogleg spring here, and the long portion will sit underneath that. Okay? Just how you're seeing here. So I'm going to put my fat finger in the way. I'm just going to suck that down. Now when it goes to press over it, it's going to need to use part of that trigger spring to get it its strength or tightening function to make this spring loaded. And that would be accomplished like so. So what I do is just set it like this and wind this back around, but oh no, you got that pin in the way. So what you can do is just work that pin up out of there. This is a very critical part, so I usually put this in there for just a mental check. That way I know that I'm making sure I'm getting everything going together right. Then of course you can just drop it back in there. No big deal. Everything's go. We want to make sure that we got good clearance all around. Make sure we got good back and forth clearance, up and down clearance, everything's seated, okay? I'm gonna let you kind of take a real close-up look at what we got going on here. That's how everything should look. Just like that. Perfect. We're gonna make this real simple. We want to look at two things. We want to have the pin in here centered up, and we want to have it nice, flush, and level. So if you install it this way, it kind of sits crooked. If you can see right here, you see how that thing sits flush. Okay? It sits nice and flush. Now if you flip this around, push this the other way around, I guess you can call that sitting flush. And here, we need to make sure we're centered up. That's just a little crooked. So if you flip this around, you actually get not only a flush fit, but you get a centered spring in there, and you got movement all the way around, a little bit of a play on all axes. That's how we want to put this in. So you have to evaluate the part for yourself. Again, we put this in here, it kind of tends to veer off like that and bow this spring out and sits crooked. We flip it around, we sit center, the spring's not bowing out, it's looking good. So next what we'll do is we'll go ahead and locate this over. There we go. Go ahead and set your trigger guard. Set it up in there like that. Then of course, test the function of it, make sure it's working. So again, so you can see that spring. Spring's gonna sit in there just like that, while the other side of it retains within the trigger guard housing. You get that nice spring pressure. Make sure there's nothing interfering. Go on to the barrel reassembly. Because this is a black oxide finish, I'm just gonna go ahead and lube it up with some oil, whatever you're using. I use Mobil 1 full synthetic, works just fine. And I think if you had a bottle with this much gun oil, it'd probably cost you $1,000 because they barely give you any gun oil for like $20. So everything's all greased up. And before we actually reinstall the barrel, I want to put the sight back on. Critical portion of this is aligning the sight properly. And you might not have to screw it all the way down. It's going to vary, so you need to kind of time your sight. And you can do so by just tightening the nut. And it should put enough backward pressure on this sight to hold it in place. If you over tighten it, you risk just stripping this piece of extruded aluminum and the threads in there, so I wouldn't recommend going down too tight. What you can do is you can actually use this housing on the barrel to index your front sight to ensure that your front sight's straight after you tighten it. And if not, just modify your adjustments. I went ahead and just tightened this down on the barrel nut and got the sight index. Just sorry I didn't take a video of it, but it's pretty straightforward. I recommend doing that before you get your grips on, so just a FYI. After fingering the barrel like crazy and getting that installed, I'm just gonna run another little light coat of oil down the barrel. And the easiest way to do the hand guards is, if you haven't modified it, I would not take any of this apart. Just don't take this apart. Whatever you do, just don't take that apart. There's no need to take this apart. If you're gonna spray Cerakote or whatever, this part should cook at low, very low temperature, about 180 degrees for about 3 hours. It should be fine. Don't take this apart. I highly encourage you not to do that. So okay, so I've left one pin with the grip pin screw installed, grip pin screw and washer installed. And what I like to do is just run it up through that way. So now we can go ahead and install the barrel. Go ahead and take your sight, and I usually let mine sit just like that, so the flat piece of this camming surface right here, or guide surface, is flat, and then you have a little protrusion over the top. Plop that sucker right in there just like that. Okay, so set your sight up, set it on that guide surface just like that, because we're gonna have to fit it in here in a second. Go ahead and set your barrel back in, putting that sight over the surface. Get it set up in place here, then snap it in. There you go. And when it breaks down, it should pull it back just like that. Okay. I like the movement. Okay, so now we're going to prepare to actually put the grip cover, this side, into position. And so for a last minute check, we want to make sure that everything's good to go. Make sure that your pins are seated. Make sure this sear spring is pushed all the way down and flush. Make sure that your hammer spring is not popping up over that grip. Make sure that your trigger bar, your trigger is functioning. You got back and forth movement. You got up and down movement. Nothing's crooked. Everything's seated in place. Because after we get here, we're at the point of no return. Make sure that you have movement there. Excellent. All right. The only thing that we're missing is one of these. So we need to put this in here now. We need to put our magazine release. Go ahead and just sneak this on. Now if everything's level and we did everything right, it should just snap right in place from what I've heard. All right. So again, with your 2.5 mil, go ahead and start running your screws down. Everything's looking really good so far. And sometimes you will actually have to check back here and make sure that you don't have any interference from the sear spring. Sometimes that sear spring can poke through. So if you do, just kind of get your punch in there or a small pick and just push it up and over so it sits back into the back of this frame. So for those of you subnuts out there, the collar, it's a 28 by 1.5 millimeter thread. So an M28 by 1.5. And just so you want to see that, the reason I'm telling you this, if you have a thread pitch gauge, it can go a long way to help you actually clean this out. So take your 1.5 thread pitch gauge and just chase the threads. Unless you have the luxury of having a 28 by 1.5 tap, and then I would probably just run the tap through it and just clean those threads out. But the thread pitch gauge works great because you see all this black stuff coming out of there? That's the adhesive from the factory. Now I'm not gonna glue mine just yet. It's, you know, a little bit of super glue, red Loctite, whatever, you know, is handy. Probably once you get all the threads cleaned out and all that adhesive broke loose, I would probably shoot it with some brake cleaner and just clean it out. So I went ahead and installed this. Now the great thing with the hydrographics is it is providing an actual surface for this to bite into, so I actually have it pretty tight just by hand. I wouldn't go any further, but once it bottoms out and stops, we're good to go. So now we need to get the hammer up, and what you can do is take a punch and slowly start the hammer to its upward position, then have a long screwdriver. You know, there needs to be a tool for this, but have a long screwdriver that'll push this over till it sets on the sear. There we go. Now we can go ahead and get the safety started and installed. Now we need to move to the safety installation. So as you can see, it won't go forward because the trigger bar is in the place, and we need to get this trigger bar to seat underneath the safety. And so what we need to do is set the safety there, take a punch, reach through to the other side, and just manipulate that down to where we can get it to go in place and through, just like that. So once you get your safety in, we need to flip this over. We don't want to pull it too far through. But what we're trying to do is expose the safety detent hole here, which of course we're going to drop. I'm actually going to go with a little bit of gun grease. Drop that spring in. Drop in the detent. Slowly work it back into the firearm. We're going to take our E-clip and get the E-clip on. Make sure it's retained. Okay. Then we just want to barely set it in there to where it's sitting on the polymer. Just like that. So then, from there, just push in. Flip it over. Come to the other side, and we'll install our other E-clip. There you go. We're installed. Then let's test it. Perfect. See, the safety detent is holding on, so I like to just move it that way. There we go. We'll go ahead and insert the bolt and bolt carrier. If you just start to push it, you'll see it just starting to come in place. You can flip this down, and of course you want to insert your bolt grip, which I would probably oil down very well. This is the part that tends to rust the most. Rub some oil on it, but go ahead and get that installed, and you could slide it forward. Sometimes you might have to actually compress that hammer a little bit. That's sitting about like right here. So if you have to compress the hammer, just go ahead and compress it with a screwdriver. There you are. And then from this point on, we can reinstall our recoil spring. Then install our stock.